This fresh coat of the startup life has been sprayed on nice and smooth by Wagner and the Flexio series of paint sprayers. Startup Nation, my wife decided she wanted to rehab her childhood home. The goal was to fix it up and invite a nice family to rent it out. We knew one of the biggest jobs we had to undertake was painting. However, from the walls, the cabinets, and even the siding outside, it was going to be a big task. As entrepreneurs with a company to run, we knew this was going to take up a lot of our time, which is why we decided to get a paint sprayer. And after much research, we decided to go with the sprayer from the Flexio series from Wagner. Startup Nation, these sprayers are top-notch because of its flexibility to paint or stain walls, furniture, cabinets, and more. It's 10 times faster than using a paintbrush, which was a big selling point for us. And you can paint or stain right from the can. It's also easy to clean in 5 minutes, and being great for indoor and outdoor projects, a paint sprayer from the Flexio series clearly needs to be part of the arsenal in your garage. So if you're ready to stain your deck, or like me, fill your daughter's request of a bubblegum pink room, up your game with a paint sprayer from the Flexio series by Wagner. Take it from me, your time will thank you.
It's time to be about that life, the startup life. Here's your host, Dominic Lawson.
All right, Startup Nation, so I hope you're ready to receive some value today. My name is Dominic Lawson, and this is The Startup Life, the show for entrepreneurs and career-minded professionals. You know, Startup Nation, with everything going on, and we're, social distancing and self-quarantine. I know a lot of you are out there and you're thinking about starting a business. A lot of you probably going the e-commerce route, setting up websites and stuff like that. And we have a fantastic guest for you to kind of help us out with that, to kind of give us a few pointers. He is the founder of WhatsMyIPAddress.com, a tech-friendly website attracting a remarkable 6 million Startup Nation, 6 million IP-seeking visitors a month. So clearly he knows a little something about websites and stuff like that. He has been featured in Fox Business, CBS News, Washington Post, the HuffPost, and more. He is my guy, Chris Parker. CP, how's it going, my man?
Great. Thank you for having me on, Dominic.
Oh, no worries, man. I appreciate you coming on. Would you be willing to pour some knowledge into Startup Nation today? Because we could definitely use some right now.
I will pour whatever knowledge I have available to you that would be of benefit to your listeners.
Sounds great. So let's get started. Let's kind of start with your origin story first, if you don't mind, CP.
Sure. So at the time that my personal origin, grew up in Southern California, have spent my entire life here. It's a great place to live as long as you don't mind taxes and high rent and high everything.
Right.
Went to college and eventually dropped out. During that time, I did work for a online mail order company selling computers, and I was part of their team to build their website and helped out with IT there. And at one point, we had an issue where we needed to know the IP address of our internet connection because we were trying to send files over to a marketing agency or something like that, and was having problems. And it's kind of at the early days of the internet, it was kind of hard to figure out your own IP address. There wasn't a whole lot of resources out there. So I built a website that night and spent domain names were expensive at the time. I think it was $100 a year at networks for a domain name.
Right.
Bought MyIPAddress.com, set it up on a Windows NT server box.
Wow.
Sitting at home on get this, folks, a 5 megabit DSL connection.
Gotcha.
If you've got a 3G iPhone,
right,
you have a faster internet connection than I did when I launched that site.
Absolutely.
Because when I did it, it was a tool to provide the IP address, nothing else. It just showed that little, depending on your IP address, that short little number on the screen. 8-point Arial font, no markup, no graphics, no ads, nothing.
Gotcha.
That was the beginning of the website.
Wow. Wow. I appreciate you sharing that. Tell me a little bit about, quick follow-up. Tell me a little bit about, selling computers and stuff like that, some of the experience you got from that company you were talking about.
Yeah, so it was a company called Club Mac.
Okay.
It was a mail order computer reseller. We sold Apple computers. This is back when Apple actually didn't sell direct. You actually had to buy it from a reseller.
Right.
And I started working there when I was in college, doing night and weekend sales, because that was, worked around my school hours.
Right.
Eventually became the night weekend sales supervisor. And then a few years later went into what they called as product management. So I helped build the catalog that would go out to people, and I handled a particular product line. It was funny. One story there is, I remember, my manager was listening. They would listen to your phone calls and kind of audit you. How you doing? What could be better? And one of the things my manager got upset at me with was someone had called in and said, "Hey, I'm looking for oh gosh, I don't even remember what Mac it was at the time, but I'm looking at this computer. Do you think it would be a good computer for me?" I said, "Well, what are you going to use it for?" So we go through it all, and ultimately, it's like it was way overkill. It was, why buy a $5,000 computer when a $1,000 computer will work for you? So I sold him the $1,000 computer. Wow. And afterwards, my boss was like, "What are you doing? You gave up. You left $4,000 on the table." And I'm like, "Well, but he doesn't need that." And it was funny because this particular customer ended up buying like $10,000 worth of hardware for me over the time that I worked for the company, because he trusted me, because I wasn't out trying to make, obviously I was trying to make money for myself,
of course,
but I was looking to make money at his expense.
Right.
I was just trying to buy, trying to sell computers at what people needed. If they didn't need something so powerful, then why sell it to them?
Right.
Because it builds trust. And so when other sales reps were hurting because, it'd been a while since we mailed out a catalog, I had people calling me back and asking for me directly because I was actually trying to meet their needs as opposed to line my pockets.
For sure. Chris, I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you for sharing all of that. And that reminds me of my banking days before we started our company, where I used to work at a bank. I'm not going to say the name. I'm just going to say it rhymes with Smell Smargo, right? And so they would have these quotas and stuff like that. And they would want you to set up certain products, even though they didn't need those products. But you're absolutely right. And I found that success as well, where Startup Nation, a lot of times we want to kind of, sell the big ticket items and stuff like that. But sometimes it's just, no, all the time, it's just important to get what the customer needs, get them what they need. And ultimately you build that success and that trust and that rapport, which means in the long term, like Chris just talked about, that long term is actually more profitable in that regard. So Chris, I appreciate you sharing that, man, because I know a lot of entrepreneurs, when it comes to selling, they miss that part.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't want to say that every methodology of selling, you can only do this, but for me, it aligned with my values and my perspective to make sure that I felt like I was helping people as opposed to how much money can I make. Right. And in certain circumstances, you've got bills to pay. Sometimes that becomes a priority, unfortunately.
For sure. So, Startup Nation, me and Chris were kind of talking before we started our conversation to share with you about how we scheduled our conversation in January. And here it is, August, and so much has changed since then. So, Chris, I want to ask you, man, kind of share with me what your new normal is looking like these days. And, in January, when we set this up, we was going to have a great conversation and stuff like that. And I think we still are, don't get me wrong, but we weren't anticipating what has transpired since then. Right. So kind of talk about your new normal a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of those things that everyone has to deal with to differing degrees. I did have the advantage that prior to COVID, I was already working at home. Right. I would still meet with a number of my vendors, guys who would write for me, do graphics work for me, meet with them in person. Mm-hmm. My wife and I love to travel. We love to eat out. Kind of all the things that you can't do during COVID-19 is what we got hit with. Right. My wife was working full time, and very, very fortunately, she's still able to work. Mm-hmm. But she's now working at home in the room next to me. Right. And so it's kind of been this shift in mentality, and I've had to. I think one of the kind of things that I'm trying to learn now is that I'm trying to find a nice way to phrase this, is that I have to be careful of how much social media and how much news I consume.
Oh yeah, that's a big one.
it's so. I've done a good job in social media. I was probably about 2 years ago. I basically turned off notifications for every social media app I have, uninstalled most of them from my phone. So I don't have social media telling me you have to read this now, because I don't want social media controlling my life.
Right.
And I think that was a real good move for my sanity. I think the harder thing has been with news about politics and coronavirus and race relations.
Right.
Like, I feel like I need to do my part and be aware of what's going on. But Absolutely. I found that, like, man, this is it really just pulls you in and sucks you in these, down these dark roads.
It can be overwhelming.
And it has been overwhelming. Right. I think that's one of the things I've realized is, those vacations, those times out of the house, eating out, that I've had to realize that I don't have those. And so those were kind of the breaks from the emotion that comes from the news. It's like, okay, no more news echo chambers, dial back to social media consumption, and really just like, okay, I just got to get back to the basics of my business, of just the news is going to continue. The world's still going to spin regardless of whether I pay attention to the news or not.
That's true.
And so I think that, like, in the moment, that's been the hardest challenge for me, is saying, like, okay, I have to intentionally not pay attention to what's to a lesser extent. I have to intentionally not pay attention to what's going on in the world and not be distracted by all the drama that surrounds us.
Right, for sure. No, I definitely understand it. It can definitely be overwhelming. I think we're all trying to find that balance, Chris, of, like, getting the news so you can stay informed and make informed decisions about everyday life and stuff like that. But at the same time, not being, overindulgent or overwhelmed or consuming too much news or social media and stuff like that. Cause that I know firsthand, like, man, that can really wear on your mental health. Right. And then everything else, from your relationship, with your wife or your family, or whatever, Startup Nation, to your business, that can really kind of snowball quite rapidly if you let it, you know what I mean? So I definitely appreciate you sharing that and being transparent about that.
Yeah. And the other thing I've tried to learn the lessons of other people, and I don't post, through my business accounts. I don't do anything that's political. I don't do anything that's race relations. I've seen my wife works in an industry where they're dealing with the backlash of the people that work with the company. I support this, I support that. I don't support this, I don't support that. Right. And, like, the company's getting complaints, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is a disaster when we start letting too much of our personal life come out through our businesses.
That's true. It can be a lot.
Especially on controversial subjects.
Right. For sure. I appreciate you sharing that. Really quickly before we transition, right? We talked about how we scheduled this conversation in January, and now we're here talking in August, and it's a whole different world. This is a true story, Chris, I'm about to tell you, right? So there was another gentleman who we had on the show recently, and he scheduled around the same time, right? And we talked to him last week. And so he's like, yeah, glad to be on the show, looking forward to it and stuff like that. Hopefully the world doesn't end around that time. And so when we talked about it, he's like, you remember that email you sent me? He's like, did I say that? It's like, yeah, you totally said it. It's like, man, you gotta stop saying stuff like that. So I just thought that was pretty funny. Once again,
it is.
Right, for sure. Once again, Startup Nation, we're talking to Chris Parker, the founder of WhatsMyIPAddress.com. If you want to check out that website, make sure you go to the show notes if you listen to the replay on the podcast. We have a link there for easy access. So let's just kind of dive into it, Chris, man. Kind of tell me about your company and what is WhatsMyIPAddress.com, and what do you do?
Yeah, so the company is the website. I don't have there's a legal structure around it as well. Sure. But predominantly what I do is the website. Originally just started purely with showing people their IP address, which is kind of like the internet equivalent of your home mailing address or your cell phone number. It's, how data gets to and from you. Everybody's got an IP address. And it's surprising like how much information you can often glean about a person based off of their IP address. Mm-hmm. So if you were to visit my website, I now have a tool on there that will show you very likely geographically where are you, and in some cases it's pretty scary, crazy accurate. Like,
oh yeah, I'm looking at it right
your
now.
Kitchen window.
I'm seeing mine right now. And it's a little scary, but I'm okay. I'm all right so far. But go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's all right. But the idea was for me to start creating awareness, both, if you're the user or whether you're trying to find somebody who's, harassing you or something like that,
right.
Or if just wanting to know, well, what do people know about me? And I think for some people that's pretty scary that you're out there on the internet. Your IP address could lead people to your front door. And for some people that's really scary. Right. And so that has led to promoting through affiliate relationships of VPN products, which route your traffic through another IP address to make, like you're somewhere else in the world. They also provide access to content that you otherwise would be able to get that's geo-restricted, and it has some additional security benefits if you're on kind of sketchy internet connectivity. You're at the donut shop and you don't trust that the donut shop owner is a network engineer. Right. Might be a good time to VPN. So that's kind of the foundation of what I've built. There's a lot of content to try to provide what can be very technical information in a very non-technical way. Right. The idea was not an IP address website for network engineers, but an IP address website for the rest of us who don't have a degree, who haven't spent years digging into the stuff, I just basically want to know what it is, how it works, how do I keep myself safe online. And that's really been kind of the foundation of what the website has provided over the last 20 years.
For sure. And you're absolutely right. Because I see a lot lately, advertisements of certain those VPN type of, secure services, or if you don't want people to check your internet history and stuff like that. So I've been seeing that a lot. I'm not going to name names because they didn't cut us a check, but I know what you're talking about though, for sure. Yeah. But I want to ask you this, what are some of those ways that, not only if I'm just casually surfing online, but if I have a business online and I'm trying to sell products or whatever the case may be and make money with my business during these crazy times, and I want to be safe and secure, what are some of those tips that we can have? I mean, that we can, follow and stuff like that.
I mean, from the business side, you've got to make sure, and this is difficult for non-technical people, you've got to make sure that you're keeping everything up to date. Right. If you're running WordPress for your website, you've got to be looking at your plugins. Are you updating the plugins as soon as an update comes out? Do you? Yeah, all those crazy plugins that you have plugins that you're no longer using. Deactivate them, because each one of those plugins becomes like an additional security risk for your website.
Gotcha.
And then you've got to look at all your business equipment. Are you keeping your updates on your computers current? The one that everybody forgets is your router. Is it updated? There's a particular brand of router called, I believe it's MikroTik. I don't know that it's super common here in the U.S.
Gotcha.
But basically, almost every single one of their routers everywhere in the world was vulnerable to being hijacked, meaning someone could take it over and route their malicious internet traffic through your their home router. So someone could be sending spam from your router. And so you scan your machine. There's nothing wrong with your machine, but your network is doing all sorts of crazy stuff. It's looking at what websites you're visiting. So those are the kind of things you have to make sure that you're periodically checking everything to make sure it's updated, that you don't have stuff installed that you don't need.
Right.
I think, when we're talking like freelancers and people that are the gig economy, you also want to be careful about, and maybe it's a little bit less so nowadays, is where you're getting your internet access. If you're going to, if you've got a co-working space, usually those are run by corporations and they've got a little bit tighter control on what's going on with their networks. But if you're going to McDonald's, Whole Foods, your local donut shop, I would probably use a VPN that routes all your traffic securely, doesn't let them snoop. It kind of keeps that little extra safety net of, okay, I'm making sure that at least if the network is compromised, I'm not potentially risking my customers, my business associates, and stuff like that.
That's key. I didn't think about that, because I know a lot of times, like you said, freelancers and people who kind of go to coffee shops or the local restaurant, like you were saying, they use that free Wi-Fi, but it could be some serious security issues. You may have customer information like just floating around in there. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, and then I think there's also just the issue of password protection, password managers. Making sure that you're not using the same password more than once, kind of these common techniques.
For sure.
I actually recently started a podcast, and we talk about which I never thought I would do, but I've actually started one. It's been a lot of fun, and I talk about kind of the scams that people fall for, and kind of what the signs of those scams are and how to protect yourself from them. And for small business people, there's a lot of scammers out there trying to get access to your bank accounts. So if you have like lots of us, we have an outsourced person doing our accounting for us. We want to make sure that we have rules in place so that if they get an email saying, hey, set up this new account and wire $5,000 to this person, that they don't just do it without thinking.
Right.
Because the scams are just getting more and more sophisticated. The scammer interacts with you. They get your email signature. They create an email address that looks like yours. They find out who your accountant is, send off an email, and then your accountant wires off your life savings to somebody else.
For sure. Yeah, that's so true. And it's so scary to think about. You know what I mean? It's like, because the thing is, I know a lot of people who've gotten by stuff like that. And like businesses, they go out of business, or like you said, their life savings is just completely depleted. And so it's really sad. So I hope you caught all that, Startup Nation. This is just super important. And I was actually going to mention the podcast, but you beat me to it. But Startup Nation, that podcast is the Easy Pray podcast. We have a link there in the show notes for easy access if you listen to the replay on the podcast. Make sure you check it out to get some of those tips and those not necessarily like scary stories, but more so to kind of equip yourself to make sure you're doing right by your customers and your business. If you're, obviously if you're using a website and stuff like that, for sure. So I appreciate you sharing that, Chris.
You're very welcome. I mean, and I should say it's not even small businesses that are at risk to these types of.
Yeah, sorry. I was in the amen corner there real quick. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
If anyone watches Shark Tank, Barbara, I think Corcoran, she lost $400,000 to one of these scams. Now, she was lucky enough that she's like high enough profile, and they found out about it soon enough that they were able to stop the bank transfer like just before it went through. Right. But this even affects, I think she owns like a payroll company as well. So it's not like she's some newbie who's not paying attention. Google and Facebook have lost hundreds of millions of dollars to these types of scams.
Right.
They're super, super prevalent. And so people just really need to be aware of them.
For sure. I appreciate you sharing that. So like I said, there's many people, during this pandemic and COVID, and they've decided, since they're working at home, like, I got time to start a business, and they're using websites and stuff like that. So if you would just kind of talk about, the ever changing landscape of SEO and monetization when it comes to the website, because I know that's a big one.
Yeah. I mean, those are really challenging in terms of, like SEO, the concepts around it have, I'm older. The concepts have changed around it from when I got involved in the internet. It used to be that you just put keyword on a page, and all of a sudden you start ranking for that keyword.
Right.
It's a lot more complex now. There's a lot of moving parts, but the primary thing is about building good authoritative content that. Google always talks about design for the user first, that you really have to think about user experience. Right. Are they going to, not just, do I have links to these articles, but, have I gotten links from real sources? Have I gotten news articles about me? And there's all sorts of ways that you can go out and do PR. Being on podcasts is a great way to get people to link to your business. If you're talking about what you do, it's a great way to get those links and to be authoritative, and people see what it is that you can provide them. So there's the SEO side, but it's really about producing consistent quality content that's readable, that people want to share. I would avoid, and I've got a bunch of this content still on my site, but of like the big gigantic wall of text where it's just paragraph. You've got to make it, it's funny that you think of this as, it does kind of fall under SEO because it's about how people interact with your page, that you have, call out text, you've got quotes, you've got images in there, you've got stuff bolded so that people can kind of skim through. They understand what's important from the article, what's not important. They spend more time on the page. Google looks at that as a ranking signal. People have a better experience. They're more likely to click, more likely to refer it to somebody else, more likely to post it on a social media, kind of making all these things easy for the person to do.
All right, Startup Nation, so we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. We got to pay some bills. Once again, my name is Dominic Lawson, and you're listening to The Startup Life. Tresta powers this episode of The Startup Life. Okay, Startup Nation, I want to talk to you about our sponsor, Tresta. Tresta is an app for iPhone and Android that lets you do business calling and texting from anywhere. I know so many entrepreneurs that are still using their personal phone number for business calls. It can get complicated drawing the line between your personal and professional life. Startup Nation, this is the best business phone app out there. Whether you just need a business phone number or if your team is ready for a complete business phone system, Tresta is totally flexible and can grow with your business. And it's all unlimited. Calling, texting, and all of the powerful call management features like auto attendance, call recording, user groups, and more for just $15 per user per month. With Tresta, there's no contract, and you don't need any special hardware, just your smartphone you're already using. Tresta is easy to configure, so you can set everything up yourself, all online, avoiding all the hassle and high overhead costs of setting up a traditional business phone system, which is important because as entrepreneurs, we are always trying to cut cost and time. They're offering a 30-day free trial so you can see if Tresta's virtual phone system is right for you. Communicate smarter and more efficiently with Tresta. Start now at Tresta.com/startuplife. That's TRESTA.com/startuplife. The link is there in the show notes if you're listening on the podcast. Tresta, business communication simplified. All right, Startup Nation, welcome back as we continue our conversation with today's guest here on The Startup Life. For sure. I appreciate you sharing that because I know a lot of people, they spend a lot of times with backlinks and trying to, fuel traffic to the website and stuff like that. And then when you get there, it's like this big wall of text. And I think you said something that was very interesting and super important where you talk about user experience. You know what I mean? Like that's super important. Like it's one thing to guide them to the site, but once they get there, they have to have a pleasant experience with your website, navigating those articles, navigating through, whatever resources and stuff like that you have. So I appreciate you sharing that, Chris.
Yeah, like you said, navigation on the website is really, really important. Can't people, once they get to your website and they want to, what's the next thing they do? Is there a clear call to action? Is it not too gimmicky? If they need more information, is there a way for them to get more information? Can they find out how to reach you? It's funny. One of my key things is when anyone approaches me and wants to be a vendor or they want to advertise, they want to be an ad network on my site, kind of almost whatever they, a business thing. Right. The first thing I do is go to their website and do they have a contact page? Where are they located? Do they have a mailing address? Do they have a phone number? And I'm amazed at how many websites don't have a phone number. All they have is like an email intake form. They don't have their address. And it's like, you seem kind of sketchy when you won't tell me where your address is. So
right, that's true.
I mean, so what is MyIPAddress.com? I don't have customers in the traditional sense. I'm not inherently selling a product or service. Right. There's no reason for anyone to know the address associated with my website. Right. But guess what? Well, I've got one on there because that's what real trustworthy businesses do. You want to send me a letter? You can find an address on my website, which you can send a postal mailing to me.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
And so I think it's kind of those, what do people expect out of a legitimate business? And then as freelancers, we make sure that we're offering those things. Is there a phone number, an address? Yeah, contact forms are great. Put them on there. But, sometimes people want to send postal mail, or you're like me. It's just part of, I've been approached by so many sketchy people that it's just part of my way of looking at businesses is how transparent are you about who you are, who the owners are, and what you do.
Right. You know what? Let's stay right there really quickly, because I know a lot of times, I know this happened to us in our business as well. Like when you first sign up, or not first sign up, when you first start a business and you get structured with the LLC and you sign up for this service and that service to help support your business, a lot of times you get stuff in the mail, you get stuff in your email inbox, and a lot of it seems a lot of, kind of sketchy, like you were saying. So if you would, Chris, kind of share some of those red flags. I know you talked about the web address and stuff like that, but what are some of those, the web address or physical address, but what are some of those other red flags that new business owners should look for, before they, hit the submit, or before they, drop that credit card information to kind of use that service for their business?
I'm one of those kind of proponents of, and this is me, if someone approaches me and is pitching their service, I'm always guaranteed not to use them. So I'm always guaranteed not to use a service that's pitched me. If I receive a physical mailing from a business, I'm just not super. Physical mailings are a little bit different, but I'm still also like really cautious about that. I know that there's. I got one the other day. It was, hey, it looked like an official letter from the state saying, hey, you need to have these employment charts, posted in your employee break room. And I'm like, well, I don't have a brick and mortar location. I don't have any employees. I don't have a break room. Well, I do, but it's my own kitchen. It's just me on the payroll. I don't need this. And I was curious. And so I went out and looked up that company on Yelp. And they had like 1,000 reviews. All of them were 1 star.
Wow.
And every review was one after another. I signed up for the $30 package. I got a phone call and they tried to upsell me the $500 package. I said, no, I just want the $30 package, but they billed me for the $500 package.
Wow. That's absurd. And I hate that because look, Startup Nation, look, we want you to have these stories and to share these stories, not to discourage you, right? But the thing is, we want you to be informed and to be empowered. So I appreciate you sharing that, because that happens a lot, especially the ones where you get the physical mailings and it's supposed to look like, something from the government or something like that. Startup Nation, real quick, if it doesn't have some type of government seal or something like that, that's a red flag in itself. I just want to add that in there as well. If it don't say it's from the state of California, from the state of Tennessee, or wherever the case may be, you might want to, do some vetting there. I'm sorry, Chris. I wanted to get that in there because I think you brought up a valid point when it comes to that stuff.
No, it is. I mean, there's so much, fake stuff out there. I, had filed a trademark for my company logo, right. And I now, periodically get, 10 to 12. Like it's really weird. It always happens at once. So maybe it's like renewal dates or something like that. But I'll get like a dozen letters in the mail about, hey, for $1,000 we can register this internationally, or you need to do this, right. And it's like. No, my lawyer didn't say I needed to do that, so right. I'm not going to do it. I mean, part of it is just like always check with somebody else. I mean, if you own a small business, you're just starting up, ask somebody else who's a small business. Hey, did you do this? Did you get this letter in the mail?
Important. That's a good one. Yeah.
Don't be afraid of looking silly asking questions to people, because everyone, when they're starting up their business, you get these things unless you've been doing this for 40 years. it's your first business. How would you know what is legitimate and what's not?
Right.
And in some cases, guess what? You're going to make a mistake. Something bad is going to happen. Mm-hmm. As a good example, I was approached by somebody who represented themselves as a representative for an ad network, a company that sells banners. Uh-huh. The company that they claimed to be representing was a legitimate company that had a good reputation. It was someone that I'm like, okay, I know who they are. They're someone I would do business with. Right. And so we started doing, I'm like, okay, yeah, I want to work with this guy. We start doing, sending paperwork back and forth. And, I checked out his website to make sure it was what I was expecting it to be. And at some point things started getting a little bit sketchy, but he was like, there's a technical problem. And I just kind of went, it's during the holidays, technical issues happen. Right. And it turns out, I'll cut this, without going too much into the minutia of the story. The guy had bought the .net version of the well-known company's name, and he had set up a website that looked exactly like the .com. He had just changed the phone number to match his phone number. Right. His email signature matched the email signature that you would expect from people at the company. His fake, infrastructure that he set up looked close enough to what I would expect it to be. Right. And it turned out that this guy basically scammed me out of $10,000 of income. Jeez. So he got paid, in theory, he made the money and was supposed to pay it to me, but he didn't pay me the money and he disappeared. Right. And my initial thought was, I'm going to war. I'm going to find this guy. Absolutely. Yeah. I'm going to make this guy's life miserable. Like he's going to, he's never going to forget the day that he crossed paths with me. And, I thought, well, let me sleep on this before I go to war. Right. And the next day I kind of woke up and went, you know what? I'm going to have to pay a lawyer. Right. That's going to cost me, as much money as it's probably going to cost me more than I've already lost to hire a lawyer. If this guy's a con man, he's probably already spent the money or doesn't even have the money. So even if I win a lawsuit against this guy, I'm not going to get my money back. Right. And I'm going to spend hours and hours and hours of time working with a lawyer, worrying about this, being stressed out about it, being upset about it, venting to my friends about it, that I'm like, what, I'm going to take this as a really expensive $10,000 lesson. And I'm just going to drop it and change my business processes to make sure this doesn't happen again. Right. And it was kind of like the best thing that I did was to just drop it, let it go. It's a lesson learned. And rather than, it could have dragged on, even if I could have found the guy, it could have dragged on for 6 months, a year, 2 years. At some point I had to decide, like, I just got to let it go. It's just not worth there's an opportunity cost to going after this. It just wasn't worth it.
Gotcha. No, I understand that. And I hate you went through that, but I appreciate you being transparent and sharing that. It's just like you said earlier. It's just like they're so sophisticated now. They're only getting more sophisticated by the day. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it's so difficult, and it's just so it can be disheartening, Startup Nation, where people are out to kind of scam you, and you're just trying to start a business, you're just trying to start this thing, and people are still out there. But I think Chris gave us some very helpful insight. One of the craziest ones I saw was actually not even over the internet. It was in person. I was actually still in my banking days where this guy came in. I was a business banker at Smell Schmargo, but the guy came in and he said, "Yeah, I'm gonna set up this business account and stuff like that." And I was like, "Hey, what's your EIN?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, I gotta finish paying this dude. I'm paying him 3 installments of $99 to get my EIN." I'm like, "Wait, what? What are you talking about?" Like, huh? He's like, "Yeah, I got to pay for my EIN." Like, "No, you don't. We can set up an EIN like right here, right now. Like, you don't have to, And so I think he had already paid him like 2 installments of $99, to get an EIN number. And so it's just amazing, and the irony is that, like, you could use that entrepreneurial prowess to do something legal. You know what I mean? And so you want to spend it doing, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was saying, I'm always baffled by that. Like, kind of tangentially related to hacking and scammers. And I'm like, man, if you just put your efforts into doing something good, this would be so much of a better world. But you're busy just trying to scam people.
Right. It's just crazy. Once again, Startup Nation, we're talking to Chris Parker, the founder of WhatsMyIPAddress.com. We have a link there in the show notes for easy access. You talked about this a little bit. We kind of got on, talking about security and scams and stuff like that a little bit. But I want to ask you about something you said earlier, because you don't have like the traditional customer base like a lot of businesses have. So kind of talk about, that a little bit. Has it been more difficult? Not as difficult as most businesses? Kind of talk about that a little bit if you don't mind.
So I actually did have a small business for a while selling books online, where I actually had inventory, and I realized that, man, like, I don't want to be spending my nights and weekends packing books. This is totally not scalable. Right. And so I had actually switched that business model over to doing Amazon, I guess it's Amazon Associates now, where I would just refer them to buy the book from Amazon, and they're like, "Oh, this is awesome! I don't have to run credit cards. I don't have to have inventory. Like, this is scalable." Unfortunately, this was shortly before. Predates a lot of people, but this was shortly before Amazon got rid of all their California affiliates. Was over, the whole fight over taxes, whether they charge taxes in California. Right. And so my business model was entirely dependent on Amazon. And they, over the course of like a week, they said, we're going to be terminating all affiliates effective next week, have good life. And so that kind of like totally put this down overnight. So the lesson there is don't be fully dependent on one source for anything.
I heard that, for sure.
But yeah, it's been interesting building a business that doesn't have doesn't have a product or a service that I charge people for. Right. My website is based solely off, or my income is based solely off of affiliate revenue and display ad revenue. And so things like COVID was like, oh gosh, this could be really bad for me, because anytime the economy does bad, people start pulling back on their advertising because they get uncertain, which means my ad revenue potentially drops off a cliff. COVID has been a very interesting scenario for me, because while economies have had challenges, and some companies have pulled back on advertising, other companies have kind of increased their ad spend. But one of the weird things that has kind of benefited, that I've been a benefactor of,
yeah,
I've benefited from,
right, I got you.
is that more people are home and online.
That's true.
And so they have more of a need to figure out their IP address. And so I saw probably at the peak 30 or 40% increase in traffic to my website.
Got you.
Now, mind you, I had a fairly significant downshift in the technical term is CPM rates, the amount of money that you make per 1,000 ad impressions. I saw a pretty significant drop in basically how much I would be paid for ads, but luckily it kind of balanced itself out, which I was very fortunate for. But it's taken years and years and years to in one case, it was building a platform to manage. I think at any given point, I had maybe like 20 different ad networks that I was working with and trying to balance their ads. And ultimately, it was like I'm spending more time effectively dealing with sales on my ad than I was spending on content creation and tools and things like that. So I ultimately ended up like part of this vision of I need to outsource more stuff. I went to, did some research, found a company that basically a turnkey solution. We take care of all the relationships for you. One billing, rather than having to invoice 20 companies, I only had to invoice one company. Didn't have 20 relationships to manage.
Right.
And so they bringing on new ad partners. They kind of handle the whole thing for me. And that's been a godsend, kind of making that transition of, okay, I need to trust people who are experts in their fields experts at what they do and leave time for my expertise and my, what do they call it, creative genius, my areas where, these are the skills that only I can do.
For sure. For sure. Thank you for sharing all of that. I want to ask you this because we kind of, you talked about the early days of the internet a few times. And I want to ask you this, as you look back and see how we use the internet has changed and grown, how people have their feelings or, how they feel towards the internet and using online stuff like that and shopping and all that stuff has evolved for the past, 20, 30 years now. Kind of talk about something that surprised you. That's kind of a thing now that you really didn't anticipate, like in the mid 90s when it came to the internet and stuff like that, in your opinion.
I mean, I think the whole concept of the internet on your phone is pretty crazy, amazing.
Gotcha.
The fact that you could have, because, back in the days when the internet started for me, maybe I had a pager at the time.
Right.
So like the concept that like you could have high-speed internet on a phone and access to information almost, immediately is really kind of crazy. I kind of wonder, what is the next step? I know for a number of years, people are talking about, voice search is going to be, is going to rule it all. We're going to be talking our smart home devices and not using our phones and our computers. And I haven't seen that materialize. And I'm kind of happy because like how you deal with voice search on a website and how do you build a website? How do you tie into those things? How do you benefit from your smart devices to drive you business? That's a real kind of like, that might put me out of business because if your smart device can answer that question, what do you need my website for?
For sure.
And so I think you always have to be kind of aware of new technologies and what's going to happen. But I think the whole concept of high-speed internet, like that's just ubiquitous. It's everywhere.
Right.
You have access to. I mean, to me, it's just. Maybe it's good or bad. I don't have to. There's so many times I don't have to, dial up a friend and what are the dial up a friend. Hey, can you tell me about? Hey, I know you're an expert in building, woodworking and building tables. Can you tell me what's the best way to sand something that's, painted?
Right.
I can look it up on my phone on YouTube and just have like almost instant access to like good quality information.
For sure.
Now, there's a lot of bad quality information. There's a lot of misinformation out there. And
absolutely.
I think that's, I think we're now starting, I think it used to be bad. There used to be a lot of bad quality stuff. And unfortunately now I think we're starting to see lots of misinformation and people intentionally kind of building bad content that are trying to be divisive. They're trying to stir up things. They're trying to mislead people.
Right.
And I think that's totally contrary to, kind of the underpinnings of the internet. The internet was designed that everybody should trust everybody, that computers, when you're handing data off to one another, there's this implicit trust in that data. And we live in a world now where, maybe the data's moved around with trust, but can we trust the content? If I receive an email, I'm pretty sure it's not really from a Nigerian prince who's got $10 million from a relative I didn't know I had.
Right.
Exactly. And somehow they've spoofed my mother's email address,
Right.
The internet was never designed with scams in mind, unfortunately, with hackers in mind.
Right.
So it's weird, how do we know we can trust the information that we can so easily find?
That's true. It's crazy because I wrestle with a fundamental question, right? Like, I'm curious are we smarter because we have access to information so fast, or our lack of having information at the fingertips has forced us to not think as much. And so we're not as smart as maybe we was 30 years ago. What's your take on that, if you don't mind me asking?
I think like you said, I think it's a double-edged sword.
Right.
I think there are people that I don't want to say they've lost the ability to reason or to think critically, but maybe have not developed that ability as much. And that is I think that's a potential problem. I don't know that we do a very good job in the educational system in the U.S., and maybe we do better than other countries, about teaching critical thinking and the importance of reasoning. How do I reason through this? How do I try to solve stuff and be creative in my answer as opposed to just looking for the solution somewhere else?
Right.
Should we, if you can trust all the data out there and it's all reliable, should we have to reinvent the wheel every time we want to do something? Right. I don't know. But I think there's a risk that we kind of lose the ability to reason, lose the ability to think, and it's now just kind of a copy and paste culture.
I agree with that. I definitely agree with that. But, to go back to what I was asking you earlier, I think the one thing I'm cool, because it's funny you mentioned that you were talking about internet on the phone. I think I'm fascinated by mobile games. Right? I think that's like crazy. And the thing is, it's like they're and they're quite good now. Like I remember the first instance I used the internet on the phone was my freshman year of college. This is like 2001, where I was reading text alerts from ESPN, like reading the news. And it's just like on a analog flip phone, right? Right? That's what I remember my first instance of the internet. But now, like, you're looking at mobile games and they're just as good as like a console game now. You know what I mean? That's kind of like bananas. And then and then to your point, the whole internet connected part of the mobile game is kind of fascinating too. So I appreciate you indulging me on all that, man.
No, I mean, I'm amazed at that as well. I mean, I don't remember. I mean, I was a gamer in the days, but I don't I'm trying to think the last game that I actually installed on my computer. Gotcha. I don't. It's on my tablet. It's on my phone. Right. And like you said, they're as good or better than a lot of desktop or console games.
Absolutely. They're pretty sophisticated. Startup Nation, we are wrapping up with Chris Parker, the founder of WhatsMyIPAddress.com. Thank you for kind of coming on the show and kind of indulging me on a few things. I know we talked about entrepreneurship, but we kind of got into some other stuff that was kind of cool. What do you think?
Yeah, I super appreciate coming on. I love talking about just what I'm learning, and I think that's a value to business owners, is having those relationships with people. Maybe they're over Zoom nowadays, as opposed to meeting someone for coffee, where you can talk about your learning, talk about what epiphany that you've had.
Absolutely.
I think maybe one parting piece of advice is growing up. Even though I went to business school for a while, I hated reading. I hated reading business books. I got nothing out of them. A while back, I was actually, I don't know, when did I buy this book? When's the copyright? I don't see it. I think it's like 1980, 1990. It's an ancient book.
Gotcha.
Getting Things Done by David Allen.
Okay.
I had read that in my college days. I had read it, and even afterwards, I had read it a couple of times and could never it just never made sense for how do I apply this to my life? How do I implement this? But, with the advent of my business getting busy, that I'm starting to lose track of things, starting to forget things, new technology on phones that sync to-do lists across platforms, the fact that I had tried to do something multiple times in the past and didn't have success at something that would help, kind of a skill set, but that at some point later on I could pick it up and my circumstances had changed such that, okay, this is useful to me now. So I think just because we've done something in the past, it didn't work for us, doesn't mean we shouldn't relook at it or try to learn a new skill set that we didn't already have.
That's true. I appreciate you saying that. And Startup Nation, that's going to wrap up our time with Chris Parker, founder of WhatIsMyIPAddress.com. We have a link there in the show notes for easy access if you're listening to the replay on the podcast. Also, check out his podcast as well, Easy Pray, the Easy Pray podcast. We have a link there for that show there as well. CP, I appreciate you coming on the show, my man.
Thank you very much, Dominic. I appreciate your time.
No worries. And as always, Startup Nation, if you have an idea, be about that life, the startup life. If you want to let us know what you think about our show, have an idea for a show topic, or would like to advertise on our show, send us a message on the Startup Life Podcast Facebook page. And while you are there, like and follow our page as well. It's a great way for us to engage with you, Startup Nation, and really grow our community. The link is there in the show notes. Subscribe to the show as it can be heard on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, or even on your Facebook timeline or any other platform you like to get your podcast. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts and you find our content valuable, please give us a 5-star rating, as it will help us climb the charts and help more people find our show. You can also listen to the show on the Startup Life Podcast new website. There you will find the all-new startup blog where I write on many topics that are interesting and helpful to you on your path to entrepreneurship. And hey, if you have an idea, be about that life, the startup life.